Let's start with real numbers. Real numbers are the numbers that we have been using day to day, such as 0, 1, minus 2, fraction like 1 over 2, 3 over 4, numbers with decimal points like 2.3, 1.5, uh, numbers with square root like square root of 2, numbers like pi, exponential, minus 3, minus 2.5, and so many more. Uh, there's one particular property of a real number that, for instance, if we take 1 square, which is 1 times 1, this will give us 1. And if we take minus 1 square, the negative of the 1, which is minus 1 times minus 1, and this will give us 1. So from here we can see that if we take a square of a positive number, we'll get a positive result. If we take a square of a negative number, we'll get still a positive result. So then a question comes up. That is there a number that if we take the square of that number, we'll get a negative number? Because from here we can see whether we take a square of a positive or negative number, we'll get a positive. So is there any particular number that if we take square of that number, we'll get a negative? So mathematicians define this number to be iota. I, that I square equal to minus 1. And they call this number, this iota, or imaginary unit. So just like 1, in the real numbers, 1 is called the unit number. So in this iota, it is called imaginary unit. Only the iota, and the iota is equal to root of minus 1. So this iota. Then they define what they call imaginary numbers. So imaginary numbers are numbers whose coefficient is I, are the real numbers with coefficient iota. So such numbers include like I itself, minus 2i, 1 over 2i. So I'm just picking a real number here and with coefficient I, 3 over 4i, 2.3i, pi I, and many more. Then another question is, what of if we add these two numbers, the real numbers and the imaginary numbers? For example, 1 plus I. If you look at this one is real number, this one is imaginary number. And the combination of these two is called complex number. So the combination of imaginary and real number is called the complex number. So other examples of complex number are, I can take 1 over 2 from the real number and add it to maybe 3 from the imaginary numbers. This is complex number. I can take minus 2 plus 4i. I can take 3 minus 2i. I can take pi plus maybe 2.5i, and many more. Now, suppose we have a complex number z equal to 3 plus 5i. Then this 3, we call it the real part. of Z, and it is denoted by RE of Z. And this 5, it is called the imaginary part of Z, and it is denoted by of Z. And this I, it is called imaginary unit. And this imaginary part I is equal to square root of -1. So we should also know that either of the parts can be 0. So either part can be 0. So real part or imaginary part, they can be 0. So let's give an example. So another example of complex number is we have, maybe suppose Z is equal to 5. If you look at in this complex number, the real part, that is the part without this I, the real part here is 5. So the real part of Z is 5. What is RE of Z is equal to 5. And the imaginary part, so we don't have if you look at this, we don't have a number with a I, with this I. We don't have a coefficient of I, a number with coefficient I. So therefore our imaginary part of Z is 0. So this number is just like Z is equal to 5 plus 0I, and 0I is just 0. And we call this pure real. So pure real is just pure real number. The number is not added with an imaginary number. And if we have Z equal to 3I, then if you look at this, the real part of this Z, we don't have any number without the coefficient of I. So it's 0, while the imaginary part of Z is 3. That is the coefficient of this I. And this number, we call it purely imaginary.